Warning, the story you're about to hear is not urban legend, and it's definitely not fiction. If abandoned places, laughing children in the dark, or motion-activated rides with no motion make your skin crawl, it's best to turn back now. This is not a haunted house. This is an invitation. While passing through a remote stretch of Pennsylvania wilderness, a group of college friends stumbled across a forgotten carnival tucked between overgrown trees and fog-heavy fields. No ticket booth, no staff, but the rides they ran, the lights always on, the music looping 1950s waltzes echoing from nowhere. Even the mirrors showed more than just reflections. What they found there wasn't just a scary story to laugh about later. It was a true horror story, one with roots in real events, whispered in corners of the internet. Reddit threads under stories from Reddit mention it briefly, always deleted hours later. Some say it's part of a growing pattern. Others say the carnival shows up when you're not supposed to find it. But if you do, it's already too late. They arrived just before dusk. The sky over rural Pennsylvania was dull and gray, the kind of overcast that flattened shadows. The carnival wasn't on the map. It didn't even appear on GPS. Yet there it was, tucked behind the tree line, nestled at the end of a dirt path. Winding off Highway 6, a red and white sign hung over the rusted entrance gate. Whistlevale Carnival, always open. No dates, no time, just those words. There were 5 of them. Jared, the leader, Sarah, the skeptic, Vince and Maria, the couple, and last Ethan, the quiet one with the camera always rolling. They had read about creepy stories like this on Reddit, watched countless Let's Read narrations about haunted places, cursed parks, and true horror stories from people who vanished just by being curious. But none of that prepared them for the silence. Carnivals were supposed to be loud, but this one felt like it was waiting. They stepped through the gate. The instant their feet hit the grounds, the air changed, thickened. Warmer somehow. The scent of popcorn and engine oil floated around them despite no food stalls and no generators in sight. And then the lights came on, all at once. The carousel began to spin. The game booths lit up in hues of sickly yellow and blood red. Plastic ducks floated lazily in a dry water tank. The Ferris wheel turned slowly, squeaking with no one riding. Jared laughed nervously. Okay, this is next level creepy, like true creepy stories type creepy. Ethan raised his camera. Keep talking like that, you'll end up in one. They split up foolishly. Maria and Vince wandered toward the funhouse. Sarah stood at the cotton candy booth, mesmerized by the machine whirling sugar into a cone, even though there was no one manning it. Jared stayed near the carousel, staring at the chipped paint on the horses. Every few seconds he thought he saw one of them blink. Ethan never stopped filming. His lens caught everything, especially what they couldn't see. The funhouse was wrong. Too quiet, too symmetrical. Vince laughed when the mirrors distorted his face, but Maria noticed something odd. In every reflection, their group had one extra person, a child, unmoving, watching, smiling. Maria looked behind her. No one. She looked again. The child was closer in the next mirror. Sarah alone now heard a tune, a broken lullaby playing from the tilt-a-whirl. It wasn't plugged in. She walked toward it and found tickets scattered on the ride as if a crowd had just left, except the paper was old, faded, dated 1971. She picked one up. The ink shifted beneath her fingers, rearranging itself into her name. Outside, Jared saw a movement near the prize booth. A stuffed bear slowly raised its paw, then dropped it. Another prize, a blinking rubber clown, rolled off the shelf by itself. He backed away. That's when he saw the photo booth. It was glowing, and someone was inside. Meanwhile, Ethan was reviewing footage from the last 10 minutes. His hands trembled. In every shot, shadows moved behind the group, wrong-shaped, like people stitched together from different bodies. One frame showed Maria staring at the funhouse mirror, but her reflection had no eyes. In another, Jared was standing still, yet his reflection was waving. Ethan looked up. The air shimmered. They regrouped at the food court, but something was off. Maria didn't speak. Vince said she wasn't feeling well. Her skin was pale. She kept glancing at empty spots. "They're not empty," she whispered once. No one heard. Jared insisted they leave, now. But the gate was gone. The dirt path erased. They ran in every direction, but the carnival was endless, looping on itself like a broken outdoors story told by a madman. Even the sky was wrong. No stars, no moon, just that gray, suffocating dullness, like they were trapped in a pocket of memory. A cage made of nostalgia. Ethan suggested splitting up again to find an exit. They refused. But Maria, she wandered off anyway. No one saw her leave. Only the camera caught it. She walked behind the carousel and never came out the other side. That night, the rides never stopped. The games never shut down. Laughter echoed from nowhere. A mechanical voice repeated, "Step right up, everyone's a winner." They searched every corner, but the carnival changed. Booths moved, signs flipped. The Hall of Mirrors now had hundreds of doors, all leading back to the center. Eventually, Sarah found a security shack near the bumper cars. Inside, dusty monitors flickered, and on every screen footage of the group walking, splitting, panicking. In one monitor, Vince was alone. He stood near a popcorn stand. The camera feed timestamp said 1973. In another, Jared sat at a bench, head in hands. Timestamp 1994. Ethan's screen showed only static. Maria's screen was blank. They weren't the first. Old flyers pinned to the walls bore other names. Handwritten notes, Polaroids, a ranger's badge from the National Park Service, an envelope labeled "To whom it may concern" inside a letter. "I worked Whistlevale in 1959. It was closed after a child disappeared, but I never left. I just changed. If you're reading this, you're already part of it. The rides feed on attention. The mirrors remember. Whatever you do, don't ride the Ferris wheel. That's where they wait." Jared didn't listen. He rode it. He never came down. When the cart reached the top, it froze silhouetted against the gray sky. It stayed there for hours. Vince began humming, a tune Sarah didn't recognize but had heard earlier from the tilt-a-whirl. His eyes were glazed, his smile wrong. He walked straight into the funhouse, vanished into a mirror. Now only Ethan and Sarah remained. They hid in the arcade behind a row of claw machines. Ethan whispered, "This isn't just a haunted place, it's a collector." Sarah nodded. "A memory trap." He showed her the footage. Their reflections had stopped matching them. They weren't blinking at the same time. They weren't moving at the same speed. Their reflections were independent now. Suddenly, static burst from the overhead speakers. A voice echoed across the park. "Welcome to Whistlevale. Your story will be preserved. Please smile." A flash, a click. Ethan's camera snapped on its own. He dropped it. The lens cracked. Inside the LCD screen, his own face smiled back, but not him. He screamed. Sarah grabbed his hand. They ran and ran and ran. But the carnival never ended. Every path led to the same spot, the photo booth. And now it was waiting. Sarah had never believed in curses. She thought creepy stories were just entertainment, dramatic retellings scripted for impact. She loved watching Let's Read or scrolling Reddit threads tagged true horror stories. But in those moments, hiding behind a defunct arcade machine, clutching Ethan's trembling hand, she realized this wasn't content. It was happening. And they were inside the story. The lights flickered in rhythmic pulses like a heartbeat. Somewhere nearby, a distorted carnival melody looped slower and slower until the notes were barely recognizable. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder, whispering, "Did you see that?" But there was nothing, just warped shadows slithering along the walls. No movement, only the smell of burning sugar and old wood growing stronger by the minute. Then Sarah saw it, their reflections, not in mirrors in the polished glass of a broken prize case. Their reflections weren't moving with them. They were just standing there, smiling. The photo booth sat dead center in the midway, now glowing softly like it was breathing. It hadn't been there earlier. Ethan gripped his camera. "I'm not going in there." Sarah didn't argue, but they couldn't run either. Every time they tried, the layout changed. The games reset, the paths twisted, even the trash bins rearranged themselves. The wilderness logic of the outside world geography direction time, none of it mattered here. The carnival had become a loop, like a living memory. They passed a small booth marked Lost and Found. Inside shelves were lined with items, wallets, lighters, children's shoes, park ranger uniforms. One had a stitched name tag, M. Gordon. Sarah gasped. She recognized the name. "I've read this before," she whispered. In one of those park ranger stories from years ago, a ranger who disappeared in Appalachia. Never found. Ethan grabbed a dusty folder tucked beneath the jacket. Inside were printed screenshots from an old Reddit post. Archived. Deleted. The title read, "Carnival in the Woods, I think it remembers people." A user named WhistleWatcher71 described a place in Pennsylvania where time fractured and people were absorbed into attractions. The post ended with, "If you ever see the photo booth, don't smile. They like it when you smile." They moved on, but now the park was different. It had grown. The carousel had multiplied. Now 3 of them stood in a line, all turning, all empty. The Ferris wheel was gone. In its place, a black monolith with flashing white text, "Enter to remember, remember to enter." Sarah touched it. Her hand disappeared for a second, like dipping it into water. When she pulled back, her fingertips were icy and wet. She didn't ask questions. She just kept walking. They reached the Hall of Memories. That's what the sign said anyway. Hall of Memories. Every moment counts. The interior was a maze of doorways, each one labeled with a year. Ethan opened one marked 2005. Inside was a room, his childhood bedroom, perfectly recreated, trophies on the shelf, Star Wars sheets, a snow globe from the Smoky Mountains. He stepped in. The door slammed shut. Sarah screamed, banged on the wall, but it wouldn't open. Inside, Ethan heard laughter. Then he saw himself a younger version sitting on the bed. But the boy turned, smiled, and said, "You left me here." It took 10 minutes to find the emergency hatch at the back. Ethan crawled out shaking, whispering, "It knows me." He showed Sarah the footage. It hadn't recorded the room, only static, but one frame flashed a still shot of Ethan as a boy standing next to that same photo booth, except the timestamp said 1992. He wasn't born until 1996. They sat down near the bumper cars, exhausted. That's when the intercom crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer. It said, "Every ride is a memory. Every player becomes part of the park. Would you like to play again?" Ethan stared at his camera. It was recording on its own, and now it was labeled True Creepy Stories, Episode 0. He didn't remember naming the file. Sarah suggested burning the place down. They found matches in the ticket booth. She lit the corner of the tent that led to the mirror maze. Flames sparked, but they fizzled out seconds later like the fabric refused to burn. Then a sign dropped from the ceiling, painted in blood-red letters, "Memories can't be destroyed." They began hearing voices, their own, echoes of arguments, laughter, conversations they never had in the park. Then stranger voices, people they didn't recognize. One voice whispered, "We are stories now. You don't leave a story, it finishes you." At 3:33 a.m., the games stopped. Total silence. The air turned electric. Sarah looked up the sky. Above the carnival was now a dome of black, swirling with images, photos. Millions of them, people, animals, parks, roads. Every image was labeled with a name and a date. One was of her from that night. A still frame from Ethan's camera, her expression terrified. Ethan turned. The photo booth was open. A spotlight lit the entrance. Smoke poured out slowly. They walked toward it holding hands. Not because they wanted to, because the ground behind them was disappearing, folding into itself like film being burned. The door creaked wider. A sign blinked above it, "Let us not meet again." They stepped inside, and the carnival blinked out. When Sarah and Ethan stepped into the photo booth, they expected nothingness, but they got light. A blinding white flash, not just from the booth's camera, but from every direction. It swallowed them. Sound fell away. No music, no whispers, no air. Just that sterile light. Then silence. They opened their eyes. The booth was gone. They were standing in a vast black room, its boundaries shifting like fog. Around them, thousands of photographs floated mid-air, some old, some new, some in black and white, others in vivid color, all labeled, all time-stamped. Most disturbing of all, some showed places they had never visited, faces they didn't know, and moments that hadn't happened yet. Sarah reached out toward one photo. It showed her, but she was older, sitting on a park bench, alone, feeding pigeons. The date was 20 years in the future, and beneath the image, a label Sarah, memory file 221, preserved. Ethan looked at his own. It showed him filming a documentary surrounded by files maps and newspaper clippings about missing people in national parks. But his expression was blank, dead-eyed. A voice filled the void, not mechanical, not human, something in between. We are the archive. We remember everything that is forgotten. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The voice faded. The photos began to rotate like galaxies and reassembled into a projection, a film. They watched scenes unfold, creepy park ranger stories told in flickering reels. One showed a ranger lost in a Colorado forest, whispering names to the trees. Another depicted campers vanishing mid-laugh in scary woods stories that mirrored every missing person poster from the last 50 years. One scene even featured the Whistlevale Carnival. In 1963, same rides, same booths, different people, children smiling, until the lights blinked out and the screen went black. Then a single message appeared. The story continues. Ethan turned to Sarah. "We're in a loop," she nodded. "This is what happens to forgotten people." They moved deeper into the darkness, following a narrow path made of old tickets. The air felt colder with each step. The sound of calliope music returned, slowed down, distorted. They reached another room. This one looked like a bedroom, but not theirs. It was from a different decade. 1950s wallpaper, a small bed, a toy clown sitting upright on a chair. A photo album lay open on the desk. Inside, images of people standing in carnival rides. But in every photo, the person's eyes were scratched out. And in the background of each shot, the same boy, pale, grinning, always near a mirror. "Do you remember seeing him?" Sarah asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "He was in one of my early shots. I thought it was lens flare." They turned the page. The next photo showed them. Tonight, at the entrance gate. The boy was behind Sarah's shoulder, his hand touching her shadow. Suddenly the booth materialized again, right behind them. Lights flashed. A new message blinked above the door. "Choose to forget or stay remembered forever." Ethan hesitated. "What if we walk away?" Sarah didn't answer. She looked around at the carnival reels, the floating photos, the evidence of true creepy stories whispered on Reddit and dismissed as fiction. This place wasn't about fear. It was about preservation. A story told too many times becomes real, and real stories never die. She stepped inside. Ethan followed. Inside, the booth was no longer cramped. It stretched endlessly, mirrors on every wall, reflecting infinite versions of themselves. Some laughed, some screamed. One wept blood. A monitor appeared. Text scrolled across select memory to erase. Underneath, a list of names: Sarah, Ethan, Maria, Jared, Vince. Ethan reached for the interface, but before he touched it, the screen flickered and changed. Now it read, "Upload complete. Memory saved. New story in progress." The door swung open. They stepped out. But the carnival was gone. They were standing in the middle of a highway, empty road, no lights. Sarah looked at her phone, no signal. Ethan checked his camera. It was full, thousands of video files, but all corrupt, except one. File 0 won't move. They opened it. The footage showed the two of them sitting on a bench, middle-aged, gray streaks in their hair. Behind them, children running past, a carousel spinning in slow motion. The same carnival, same sign. Whistlevale, always open, Sarah whispered. We never left. Ethan dropped the camera. It cracked bleeding static across the screen. Behind them, a distant jingle echoed. Then laughter, and in the sky above the stars rearranged into a single word: remember. The road they stood on was unfamiliar. Silent woods flanked both sides. No birds, no wind. Just the remnants of the carnival fading behind their eyelids, as if it had never existed. Ethan turned to Sarah. This isn't over, he said. She nodded. It never is. They walked for what felt like hours. Then headlights. A pickup truck pulled up. A middle-aged man with a long gray beard leaned out. You two all right? He asked. They hesitated. We were at Whistlevale, Ethan said without thinking. The man's face changed instantly, a flicker of something ancient, something afraid. You get in, he said. Don't say that name out loud again. They rode in silence. Eventually, he dropped them at a diner on the edge of town, Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania. Before driving off, the man left them with a warning. Don't tell anyone. Not the cops, not your friends, not Reddit. That place, it's not a story. It's a recording. Every time someone repeats it, it remembers better. Sarah and Ethan sat in the booth, surrounded by Formica counters and the smell of burnt coffee. Ethan pulled out his phone. One bar of signal. He typed Whistlevale Carnival into Reddit. No results. He tried Google. Nothing. Just one link to a park ranger story from 1985. The story described a ranger investigating strange music in the Pennsylvania wilderness, only to vanish days later. His last log entry mentioned a merry-go-round spinning at midnight. No source, no power. The story had two comments. Heard this before. It always ends the same. Let's not meet again. They booked a motel. Ethan couldn't sleep. He scrolled through his files again. His phone showed one video. File 02 move. He played it. It was Sarah sitting alone in the diner, but she hadn't done that. Not yet. She was older in the video, tired. The caption read, Sarah, preserved, Twina 42. He closed the app. The next morning, they visited the Cedar Hollow Historical Society. The receptionist, a quiet woman in her 60s, listened as they cautiously asked about abandoned carnivals or unusual disappearances. Her eyes narrowed. You two need to speak to Lester, Sarah asked. He used to work for the Forest Service. Before that, the carnival. They found him in a nursing home just outside town room 214. Lester was 91, half blind, but when Ethan mentioned Whistlevale, the old man sat up like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. I remember. He spoke for hours of how the carnival had once been a real traveling show, the last ride opening in 1956. One summer it rolled into town. Kids vanished. A ranger investigating the disappearance never returned. Then the carnival was gone, but people kept hearing the music, seeing the lights. sometimes even dreaming about it. It's not a place, Lester said. It's a memory field, a sentient one. When people forget, it sleeps. When they remember, it feeds. Sarah asked why the photo booth. Lester looked at her, dead serious. Photos trap moments. Moments trap people. That booth, it doesn't take pictures. It takes versions. He pulled out a box beneath his bed. Inside a file folder marked Lost Exhibits. There were creepy stories from campers who walked through trails only to find Midway games in the trees. True horror stories written by hikers claiming they woke up inside mirrored rooms. One Reddit printout showed a post from a user who claimed his national park story involved a clown Ferris wheel and rides that asked for blood. All of them ended the same way, with silence or vanishing. Lester handed them a final page. It was a photo. The boy from the mirrors. Only this time, he wasn't grinning. He looked hollow. Lost, my brother Lester whispered. He got taken in 1957, the first. Later, back at the motel, Sarah cried for the first time. She whispered, "This is too big for us." Ethan nodded but said nothing. That night, the photo booth returned. Inside their room, lights flickering, door slightly open, a new sign blinking, "You are now curators." They didn't sleep. They watched, waited, until dawn, and the booth vanished again. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Sarah created a digital archive. They gathered testimonials, posted anonymously. Each submission was marked with a code. CWS Creepy Wilderness Stories, NPF National Park Files, CRS Carnival Return Sightings. They collected audio-video journals, and the stories kept coming. From rangers, campers, tourists. Some claimed to have seen the boy in their bathroom mirrors. Others said their children began singing carnival songs they'd never heard before. One chilling entry read, "I live in Nevada. My kid drew a picture of a merry-go-round with 5 people. 2 of them looked like your photos. My kids never left the state." Another came from a backpacker in Oregon, found a torn poster in the woods. Said, "Whistle Vale welcomes you." It wasn't weathered, looked new. I took a picture. Next morning, the photo was gone, phone bricked. Each report ended with a common line, "Please don't forget me." Sarah began to suspect that forgetting was the key, not destruction, not escape, just silence. But Ethan disagreed. "These aren't scary stories," he said. "They're true stories. Someone has to remember." The final turning point came from a letter. It arrived without return address, inside a single Polaroid. Them, smiling at the Whistlevale gate. The caption read, "Reopening soon." The next morning, Ethan was gone. No note, no signs of struggle, just the camera left on the bed. The final video played automatically. Ethan sitting on a bench. Behind him, fog. Carnival music in the distance. He looked into the lens. "I'm staying," he said. "I have to finish the archive. Tell Sarah not to come." The screen went black. Sarah hasn't stopped looking. Not really, but the booth hasn't come back. Yet. Until it does, she keeps the stories alive in secret files, encrypted backups, even private Reddit forums. Because if there's one thing she knows for certain, if we forget the carnival, it remembers us instead. Sarah didn't speak about Ethan for months, not to anyone, not online, not even in the deepest corners of Reddit where true horror stories and creepy stories lingered like cobwebs on forgotten servers. She moved to Maine, small town, coastal fog. Her computer stayed off for weeks. She didn't write, didn't record, but Whistlevale wasn't finished with her. Because some stories don't end when you close the page. Some stories are recursive, they loop. And Whistlevale. It was built to remember. It started again with whispers in the fog. One morning, Sarah found footprints leading to her porch, child-sized. No neighbors had kids. She set up cameras. The next night, the lens picked up something horrifying, a photo booth. just standing there in her backyard, lit from within, door ajar. She smashed it with a crowbar. The wood cracked, sparks flew, but the next night it returned whole again. This time it was inside the house, waiting. Sarah knew what it wanted. She turned the camera on herself. My name is Sarah Blake. I was at Whistlevale Carnival in 2024. I'm recording this so anyone remembers. She posted it anonymously. It ended up in a subreddit called RR Creepypasta. Nobody believed her, except one. A message arrived in her inbox days later from a user named FogSleeper92. I saw the booth too, in Zion National Park. I thought I was hallucinating, but it took my brother, attached a photo, the same booth, the same child, the same sign, take a memory, leave a version. Sarah began collecting again, but now the stories were flooding in. National park stories, park ranger stories, reports of music in deep woods, scary wood stories of reflectionless lakes where photo booths sat at the center of small islands. Dozens described entering a booth and waking up years later, changed. Older or younger, sometimes not even themselves. She built a database, whistlevalearchive.org, hidden from search engines, accessible only through backdoor forums. She uploaded hundreds of accounts, each tagged with metadata: creepy outdoor stories, true creepy stories, wilderness stories, scary horror stories, let's not meet. One report came from Utah booth appeared in a canyon. I walked away, but the next morning my campsite had changed. My tent was 20 years old. My beard had grown 4 inches overnight. Another came from Alaska. I heard carnival music on the wind. I followed it and found a rusted ticket booth buried in the snow. It asked for my first kiss. I gave it. I don't remember her name anymore. And one chilling submission. My son vanished at a state fair in 1999. I thought it was a kidnapping, but last week he emailed me, said he'd been preserved, sent a photo of himself standing in front of Whistlevale's gate. He hasn't aged a day. The stories weren't stopping. They were spreading. Wilderness outdoors, urban alleys, lakeside cabins, even national parks with zero carnival history. The booth was jumping, not moving, copying, multiplying, a virus made of nostalgia and fear and memory. One night Sarah dreamed of Ethan. He sat in the photo booth surrounded by mirrors. He whispered, "Come finish the story." She woke to find her laptop open, her archive rewritten. Every file now had one final sentence pending return. She booked a flight to Pennsylvania, back to Cedar Hollow, back to the woods. She followed the GPS into the trees. Same place, same spot. The carnival wasn't there, but the photo booth was alone. It pulsed with light. A sign above it flickered, "Final entry." She stepped in, no hesitation, no fear, only purpose. Inside the mirrors were gone. Instead, there were rows of screens playing back all her archived true stories, one after another. Park rangers whispering names, campers forgetting birthdays, mothers looking into reflections that blinked first. A voice spoke, "You have done well, Sarah Blake. You remembered them. Now we remember you." She was offered a choice. 1. Forget everything. Wake up in Maine. No Ethan, no Whistlevale. 2. Stay. Cure it. Keep the carnival alive. Sarah chose neither. She whispered, "Let me write the ending." The screen dimmed. A final message appeared. Begin closure sequence. Outside in the real world, the booths began disappearing, one by one. The reports stopped. The Reddit threads dried up. Podcasts moved on to new topics. But every so often, someone finds a photo of a smiling woman in a carnival no one remembers. Caption reads, "Thanks for visiting."